Kettle Creek Auto Salvage, Beaufort, South Carolina. A Thursday in late October, just past 2 in the afternoon. Diane Voss arrived in a pressed linen blazer and leather flats, a city planner named Gordon Tabb at her shoulder, and a photographer from the county office trailing behind. She had parked her white SUV at the edge of the gravel lot and walked in like someone entering a place they had already decided to leave. Cass Whitmore was under the frame of a 1997 Silverado when they arrived. He heard the heels on gravel, too deliberate, too clean for this yard, and rolled out on the creeper without hurrying. He did not wipe his hands. He stood. He was 41 years old and had the kind of stillness that comes from years of working in heat and noise and learning not to fight either. Diane Voss looked at him. She looked at the rows of gutted cars behind him, at the corrugated roof of the parts shed, at the oaks draped in Spanish moss along the fence line. Then she looked back at him. She said it the way someone says a thing they have rehearsed enough that the edges have worn smooth. "Mr. Whitmore, I'll be direct with you. This parcel is going to be part of a waterfront corridor plan whether you're in the room or not. You'd be wise to take the buyout now before the county puts a number on it." She tilted her head. "Go find yourself a smaller operation, somewhere inland. A man with your background should know when he's outgrown his usefulness." Cass looked at her. He said nothing. He bent back down, slid under the truck, and went back to work. She stood on the gravel for a moment longer than she intended to. Then she turned and walked back toward the SUV. Gordon Tabb did not follow immediately. He looked at the ground, looked at the truck, and walked away. Drop your city in the comments below. Like the video if you want to see how this ends, and stay with us until the final scene. The yard cleared by 5. The afternoon crew drove out in order, Hector first, then Pete and the 2 brothers from Yamasi, and the gate clicked behind the last truck. Cass stayed. He always stayed on Thursdays to pull the parts request backlog and cross-check the inventory log against what had actually moved in the week. He did it by hand on a clipboard, standing in the aisle between the rack shelves, the way his father had done it and his grandfather before that. The words from Diane Voss sat somewhere behind his ribs. He did not examine them. He moved through the inventory the way he moved through everything, methodically, without theater. At 5:30, he locked the parts shed, walked to his truck, and drove north on Carteret Street toward Ladies Island. He pulled to the curb outside Beaufort Elementary with 4 minutes to spare. June came out with both straps of her backpack buckled, which meant she had remembered to close it, which meant it had been a good day. She was 7. She climbed into the cab and put her lunchbox on the seat between them and said, "We made paper cranes today. How many?" 4. Mine kept falling apart. She held up a crumpled square of red origami paper. "Miss Carver says the fold has to be sharp or the whole thing collapses." "Miss Carver's right, Daddy." She looked out the window. "What's a corridor plan?" He looked at her. She was tracing a crane fold into the paper on her knee. "It's when people decide what a piece of land should be used for. Do they ask the people who live there? Sometimes. That doesn't seem right." "No," he said, "it doesn't." They stopped at the yard for 10 minutes while he filed the signed delivery slips. June wandered along the fence line and found a piece of green sea glass the size of a quarter in the crushed shell along the edge. She put it in the front pocket of her backpack. She did not see the business card that had been left on the step outside the parts shed door. Cass saw it. He picked it up. Voss Coastal Development, Diane Voss. He put it in his shirt pocket and did not say anything. At home on the island, he heated the leftover soup his Aunt Phyllis had left in a pot on the stove with a note taped to the lid that said, "Don't forget to eat it this time." His father, Ray Whitmore, came over at 6:30 with a paper bag of biscuits from the bakery on Bay Street. Ray was 68 and moved more slowly than he used to since the surgery in the spring, but he came on Thursdays because he said a girl June's age needed a second voice at the dinner table and he intended to be it. "How'd the day go?" Ray said, not as a question. "It went. Something happen?" A woman from county came to look at the yard. She had a city planner with her and a photographer. Ray set a biscuit on June's plate. He did not ask anything else right away. He pulled one apart for himself and chewed it slowly. "Those people don't come unless they've already made a decision," he said. Cass did not answer. He refilled June's cup and passed the soup ladle to his father. June told Ray about the paper cranes. She told him about the fold needing to be sharp or the whole thing collapsed. Ray listened with both elbows on the table, which was not something he allowed June to do, but he allowed himself on Thursdays when there was soup. After dinner, June brushed her teeth and asked Cass to read to her from the book about tidal marshes that her teacher had sent home. He read her 2 pages. She fell asleep before the third. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at her in the half-dark. The piece of sea glass was on the nightstand next to the lamp she never turned off all the way. When he came back to the kitchen, Ray was at the door with his jacket on. "You going to fight it?" Ray said. Cass looked at the soup pot. "I don't know what there is to fight yet." Ray nodded. He tapped the doorframe twice, an old habit, the same knock he had used on the parts shed door every morning for 32 years before he handed the yard to Cass. He walked out, the truck started and pulled away. Cass listened until the sound was gone. He washed the dishes. He turned off the porch light. He sat at the kitchen table with the business card in front of him and his hands folded on the surface. The clock above the refrigerator ticked. From the other room, the quiet breathing of his daughter in the half-dark. He looked at the card once and turned it face down. He went to bed at 9:30. He did not check his phone. Diane Voss drove back to Beaufort the following Tuesday morning with a manila folder in the passenger seat. She had a preliminary zoning assessment to deliver in person. Her father had told her a long time ago that courtesy was not softness, it was precision. She had not slept cleanly. She parked beside Cass's truck and walked across the gravel with the folder open in one hand. He was at the back of the lot measuring a flatbed section with a steel tape. He heard her approach and did not stop measuring. He finished the mark, retracted the tape, and looked up. He did not greet her. She said, "Mr. Whitmore, I came to hand you the preliminary assessment in person. It was the least I could do." She held the folder out. "Voss Coastal is not moving forward with your parcel. Not this quarter. I wanted you to hear it face to face." He took the folder. He set it on the hood of his truck without opening it. "Thank you, Ms. Voss." She had expected argument. She had expected the kind of anger that comes from a man who has been waiting 3 days with a clean grievance in his chest. She had not expected a man who absorbed news like it was weather, something that arrived, something he had already accounted for. At 9:17, a dark green government sedan turned in from Carteret Street and stopped on the gravel. A woman stepped out, late 50s, gray hair pulled back, civilian clothes, but the posture of someone who had spent years in uniform. A second woman followed from the passenger door, younger, with a leather portfolio under her arm. The older woman crossed the yard without looking at Diane. She stopped 2 yards in front of Cass and stood straight. "Mr. Whitmore." Her voice was level and warm and carried the particular authority of someone who had no need to raise it. "I'm Dr. Harriet Cohn. I was your wife's commanding officer at Naval Hospital Beaufort. I came because I heard what happened last week and I wanted to come myself." The yard noise continued. A crow called once from the oak line. Cass pulled off his work gloves 1 finger at a time. He laid them on the hood beside the folder. He did not speak. He waited. Dr. Cohn said, "I also came to ask you something. The Naval Hospital is partnering with the county on an emergency preparedness inventory. Vehicles, heavy lift, structural recovery support for coastal disaster events. You're the only licensed heavy recovery operator on this end of Beaufort County with a Class A certification and a current EPA metals designation." I came to ask in person. Diane Voss had not moved. She was standing 6 feet to the left and slightly behind, and she was very still. Dr. Cohn turned, the first time she had acknowledged Diane since arriving, and looked at her directly. "Ms. Voss, this man's wife served 3 tours at Naval Hospital Beaufort as a surgical trauma nurse. She deployed twice to Kandahar. She spent 14 years keeping people alive in conditions most people couldn't drive through." She paused. "He ran this yard through all of it. He raised his daughter here. He did not ask anyone to notice." Diane did not speak. Behind her, the folder on the hood of the truck had her name on the tab. Cass turned back to Dr. Cohn. "I appreciate you coming, Dr. Cohn. The yard's not in a position to take on a county contract right now. I've got pending assessments I haven't resolved." Dr. Cohn nodded once. She reached into her jacket pocket and set a card on the hood of his truck. "Whenever you're ready, my door doesn't close." She turned and walked back to the sedan. The younger woman was already at the passenger door. Before she got in, she stopped beside Diane. She spoke quietly, almost under the engine noise. "Miss Voss, whatever you think this place is, it isn't. Don't ask him about his wife. Not yet." The door closed. The car pulled out and turned south. Diane stood on the gravel. The wind off the Beaufort River carried the smell of mud and salt marsh and the distant machinery from the port. She had not known he was a veteran's husband. She had not known about the deployments. She had not known his wife at all. Across the yard, Cass put his gloves back on and went back to the flatbed section. He did not look at her. He did not look at the card on the truck hood. He worked because it was 9:20 on a Tuesday in October, and the tape measure was still in his hand. At 10:15 she called her brother from the parking lot of a coffee shop on Bay Street. She did not trust her voice indoors. "Tell me about Kettle Creek Auto Salvage," she said. "What do you know about it?" Her brother Warren was a real estate attorney in Charleston and knew most of the moving land in the Lowcountry. He was quiet for a moment. "That yard has been in the Whitmore family since 1961. The grandfather built it. The father ran it until a few years back. The current owner, Cass Whitmore, took it over about 8 years ago. He's got the only dual license recovery and metals processing operation in Lower Beaufort County. There's no real replacement for what he does." "Why?" She told him what Dr. Cohn had said about the wife. Warren was quiet longer this time. "Diane, come home. Think before you file anything else." She drove back to the yard at 3 o'clock. She had stopped at a bakery on Carteret Street and bought a box of coffee and a bag of biscuits from the same place Cass's father went on Thursdays. She had seen the name on the bag in the trash at the yard earlier. She set the box on the hood of his truck without calling ahead. He came around the corner of the parts shed and stopped when he saw her. She said, "I don't know what I'm doing here, but I think I owe you more than a folder." He looked at the coffee box for a long moment. He opened it. He poured 2 cups from the thermos inside and handed her one without a word. They sat on the cinder block step at the edge of the parts shed. The yard was quiet. Ray Whitmore walked past on his way from the back lot and stopped when he saw Diane. He looked at his son, then at her. He nodded slow and without comment, and kept walking. June came out of the parts shed with a piece of rust-red metal shaped like a wing, flat and smooth on one side. She held it up to Diane without explanation. Diane took it. She turned it over in her hands. "Are you the lady who came before?" June said. "Yes. You made Daddy quiet." Diane did not answer. She did not know what the answer would mean. June took the metal piece back, examined it herself, and set it carefully on the cinder block beside the door. Then she went back inside. Cass watched his daughter hand something to this woman and then take it back. He said nothing. He drank his coffee. The marsh smell came in off the river. They sat in a silence that was not comfortable, but was not hostile either. It was the kind of silence 2 people sit in when neither of them has figured out what comes next. That evening, after Diane had driven back across the bridge to the mainland, a man named Conrad Webb left a message on her personal cell. She had met him twice at county planning meetings. His voice on the voicemail was friendly and measured. He said he was assembling a group of waterfront stakeholders for a conversation about a new initiative. He called it the Beaufort Sound Revitalization Corridor. He said he'd send materials. The materials arrived as a PDF attachment just before midnight. She was at the kitchen counter in her apartment in downtown Beaufort with a glass of water and the overhead light still on. She opened the attachment. She scrolled to the site map on page 4. The center parcel, highlighted in blue, was marked as priority acquisition. Kettle Creek Automotive, 6.2 acres, Beaufort County, SC, estimated post-rezoning value, $31 million. She did not call anyone. She put the glass down very carefully on the counter because her hand was not steady. She did not sleep. By 6 in the morning she had a list. She called Gordon Tabb at his office at 7:40. "Gordon, I need you to pull every waterfront transfer in Beaufort County in the last 30 months. Cross-reference Webb Capital Group and any LLCs sharing a registered agent in Charleston." There was a pause. "Diane, that's outside our normal." "I know what it's outside. Do it anyway. I'll explain later." He did. The files arrived by encrypted transfer at 4 that afternoon. She laid the printouts across her kitchen table and worked until 1 in the morning with a yellow highlighter and a red pen. She drew lines between entities. She wrote notes in the margins. The pattern was not complicated once you could see it. It was just wide enough that no single piece looked wrong. Conrad Webb's investment group had assembled 11 contiguous parcels along the Beaufort River through 3 shell companies: Palmetto Sound Holdings, Lowcountry Renewal Partners, and Coastal Carolina Asset Group. All 3 shared a registered agent whose office was a suite in a building on King Street in Charleston. The buying had begun 22 months earlier. Of the 11 lots, 10 were under contract or in transfer. The 11th, the one without which there was no direct water access for the proposed marina development, was Kettle Creek Auto Salvage. She drove to the yard at 8 the next morning. She brought the printouts, not coffee. She spread them on the hood of Cass's truck while he stood beside her in his coveralls, reading without touching the paper. He did not look surprised. "Conrad Webb has been circling this property since the spring," he said. "I've had 2 offers through different names. I didn't know the names were connected. They are." She looked at him. "He doesn't just want the land." Cass was quiet. He looked at the map. His jaw moved slightly on one side and then stopped. "Old story," he said. "I'll tell it once." She did not push. June came out from behind the shed with a bleached sand dollar she had found in the parts box near the drainage channel. She held it out to Diane. Diane took it and turned it over in her palm. It was whole, not a crack in it. She put it in the pocket of her blazer. That afternoon, a man named Denny Holt came by the yard in a civilian car. He was 43, a former Navy contractor investigator who had done 3 years of oversight work with the Naval Facilities Command out of Charleston. He and Cass had served on the same emergency response subcommittee 4 years back. He set a Tupperware container of his wife's shrimp and grits on the parts shed counter for Ray, and on his way out, caught Cass at the gate. "There's something you need to know," Denny said. Webb Capital Group had a subcontracting with the Naval Station Maintenance Division from 2019 to 2022. There was an internal audit. It's not public. You were named as a witness. Webb pulled the contract before the findings were finalized. The audit got buried. He stopped. "I kept a copy. It's in my truck." Cass looked at him. "Denny, that's 3 years old. The rezoning hearing on your parcel is in 10 days. It's not 3 years old anymore." Denny drove out of the yard. Cass stood at the gatepost and looked at the road for a moment. He did not call after him. Diane was at her kitchen table at 11 that night when her phone rang from a number she didn't recognize. It was Denny Holt calling from a different phone. "Ms. Voss, I have the unredacted audit from 2022. It covers Webb Capital's subcontract work at Naval Station Beaufort, bid manipulation, false compliance certifications on 2 buildings, and 1 incident of falsified inspection records on a generator system in a medical ward. The inspection record goes back to the same period when." He paused. "The audit names a date. November 14, 2021. You should know that date." She said nothing for a moment. "What happened on November 14? There was a pause. "That's what you'll understand when you read it. Meet me at Brown's Cafe on Port Republic Street tomorrow morning at 7. Bring a folder. Don't tell Cass." She set the phone down face up on the counter. She left it there. She looked at the sand dollar on the windowsill. She poured water she didn't drink. She sat in the kitchen until midnight doing nothing except listening to the boats on the river. Brown's Cafe opened at 6:45. Denny was in the back corner at 7:03 with a paper cup and a manila envelope on the chair beside him. He pushed the envelope across the table without preamble. She read it there. He did not speak while she read. The audit was 41 pages. The first third covered bid manipulation. Webb Capital had submitted matching bids through 2 of the 3 shell companies during the Naval Station's 2020 facility contract cycle, creating false competition. The second section covered the compliance falsifications on 2 support buildings. The third section was 4 pages long and covered a single incident. On November 14, 2021, the emergency generator in the medical ward of the Naval Branch Health Clinic at MCAS Beaufort failed during a power outage. The generator had been serviced and certified by Webb Capital's maintenance subcontractor 11 days earlier. The certification was false. The generator had not been tested. The ward lost power for 47 minutes. Diane read the next paragraph slowly. Among the 3 patients in critical care during those 47 minutes was Lieutenant Commander Sandra Whitmore, U.S. Navy Nurse Corps, who had been admitted 4 days earlier following injuries sustained in a training accident. She was 40 years old. She did not survive the outage. Diane put the page down. Her hands did not shake. Something behind her sternum did. Denny watched her. "The Navy conducted a separate patient safety review," he said. Cass was not part of it. They recused him because of his relationship to her, but he had already testified in the subcontract audit before her admission. He knew what the audit showed. He knew what Webb had done. He chose to file the testimony and then go home and be a father. He didn't make it public. He asked me to file the paperwork and forget it. I didn't forget it. She closed the envelope. She drove to the yard. Cass was at the back of the lot running a diagnostic on the winch cable. She walked toward him across the gravel with the envelope in her hand and held it out. He looked at it. He took it. He looked at the front page. He set it on the truck hood. He said, I told Denny to let it go. She said, there's a public hearing in 10 days. He did not respond. You knew about the rezoning. I've known for 53 days. She looked at him. You weren't going to say anything. He looked at the horizon beyond the fence line. Sandra wasn't coming back either way. June was 6. She needed me here, not at hearings. Diane's voice did not rise. She did not need it to. You're going to fight it now, and I'm going to help you. He looked at her for a long count, then at the envelope, then at the yard around them, the rows, the cranes, the Spanish moss on the oaks along the fence, the parts shed where his father's handwriting was still on the labels inside the door. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He picked up the envelope and walked into the office and put it in the bottom drawer of his desk. She was already on her phone before she reached her car. The Beaufort County Council chamber on the night of November 8th was standing room from the back wall to the press table. The Beaufort Gazette had 2 reporters in the second row. A camera crew from WFE had set up beside the first pillar. Gordon Tabb sat in the back row in a blue tie and did not announce he was there. Cass Whitmore wore a gray button-down and dark slacks. No uniform, no insignia. He sat in the third row beside Diane Voss. Conrad Webb spoke first. He had formally recused himself from the council vote 2 weeks earlier. He spoke now as a private citizen and waterfront stakeholder. He spoke about brownfield remediation. He spoke about economic revitalization. He spoke about the opportunity to bring a $31 million marina and mixed-use development to the eastern waterfront. He used the word legacy 4 times. He did not look at Cass. Diane Voss stood when he sat down. She introduced herself as a county-licensed development consultant and the founder of Voss Coastal Development. She spoke into the microphone without notes. She made 3 points. First, Kettle Creek Auto Salvage held a current EPA Tier 2 metals certification and a South Carolina Class A heavy recovery license. There were 2 facilities in the Low Country that held both. The other was in Walterboro. The parcel was not a brownfield. It was a licensed, operating, irreplaceable service asset. Second, she held up a single-page diagram. Webb Capital Group had assembled 11 contiguous parcels along the Beaufort River waterfront through 3 shell companies, sharing a single registered agent in Charleston. The pattern of acquisition, the timing, and the shell structure suggested a conflict of interest involving a stakeholder who had recused himself from the vote, but not from the process. Third, she moved to postpone the vote pending an ethics review of the acquisition process and a public audit of the rezoning application. A murmur moved through the chamber. Conrad Webb leaned toward his microphone. His voice was calibrated. He had been practicing it for many years. Miss Voss is defending a salvage yard. I'd like to know why. The silence that followed had room in it for many things to fall. In the back of the chamber, Dr. Harriet Cohn stood. She did not approach the microphone. She did not speak. She simply stood, hands folded in front of her, with the posture of someone who had spent 30 years deciding which rooms to enter and how. The Gazette reporter in the second row turned around. She wrote 1 line in her notebook. Dr. Harriet Cohn, former Chief of Staff, Naval Hospital Beaufort, 2009 to 2022. Conrad Webb lost his thread. He shuffled the paper in front of him. Cass Whitmore stood. He did not go to the microphone for several seconds. When he spoke from where he stood, with one hand on the back of the bench in front of him. My wife worked at Naval Branch Health Clinic at EMSA Beaufort. She was a trauma nurse for 14 years. She survived 2 deployments to Afghanistan. She came home twice. The third time she was admitted to her own clinic after a training injury. A generator failed because someone signed a maintenance certification they never performed. She was in that ward. She did not come home from that. He looked at Conrad Webb. Mr. Webb, your company certified that generator. Your subcontractor signed the compliance form. I testified to that in an internal audit in 2022. The Navy chose to classify the findings. I chose at that time not to make it public. My daughter was 6 years old. She needed her father in the house, not at a microphone. He paused. He looked down at his hand on the bench. He looked up. I am at the microphone now because this yard was built by my grandfather in 1961. My father ran it for 30 years. My wife spent 14 years driving past it on her way to the base. My daughter has grown up playing in it. It is not a brownfield. It is not blight. His voice dropped not from weakness but from the weight of saying the thing plainly. My daughter still has the sea glass her mother gave her the last time she came home. Sandra told her that the ocean keeps what it loves. The ocean should not have had to keep Sandra. It should have brought her home. The chamber was very quiet. The council voted 4-2 to postpone the rezoning indefinitely and to open a formal ethics review of the Webb Capital acquisition process. The Beaufort Gazette ran the shell company diagram on the front page that Friday. By Monday, Conrad Webb had withdrawn from his council seat. The statement said health reasons. The South Carolina Ethics Commission opened a preliminary inquiry the following week. The morning after, the yard was cold with river fog. Diane drove out at 6:45 and parked behind Cass's truck. She didn't know what she had come to say. She came anyway. He was in the office making coffee on the old propane burner, the same one his father had used. He poured a second cup when he heard the gravel and held it out when she came through the door. She took it. They stood at the office window and watched the fog sit on the lot. Neither of them spoke for a full minute. Outside, June came down from the house in her coat and boots with something in both hands cupped carefully. She pushed the office door open with her elbow and walked straight to Diane. She opened her hands. A small brown pelican feather, clean and dry, with a bronze sheen along the spine. "Miss Carver has a pelican poster in class," June said. "She says they remember where they've been." She held the feather up to Diane until Diane took it. The room was very still. Ray Whitmore was in the folding chair in the corner. He watched his son's face. He watched Diane's. He did not say anything. He nodded, slow and once. Cass stood at the burner with the enamel cup still in his hand. He did not look at June. He looked at the window. The angle of his shoulders moved, a small thing, something that only changed in a man who had been holding them tight for a long time. Diane put the feather in her coat pocket. She did not trust herself to put it anywhere else. That afternoon, Dr. Cohn called Cass from the hospital. "I'm going to say something I should have said 3 years ago. I was on the review board that received your 2022 testimony. I recommended classifying the findings. I told myself it was to protect the institutional process. I was wrong. I'm asking if you'd be willing to consult civilian, no uniform, no obligation, on the hospital's emergency preparedness review. Not because we need your equipment, because you saw what we missed and you were right. You deserve to come back on your own terms." Cass was quiet for a long count. "I'll think about it," he said. "Not for the institution. For Sandra. She would have wanted it fixed." "I know she would," Dr. Cohn said. "I knew her." Ray was admitted to Beaufort Memorial 2 weeks later. The doctor used the words comfortable and manageable, which Ray said were the same as saying we don't know but more politely. He came home after 3 days and resumed Thursday dinners as though the hospital had been an inconvenience. Diane came on a Thursday in December. She brought a pot of she-crab soup from a place on Bay Street that Ray had mentioned once in passing. He took a full bowl and told her about the time in 1987 when her father, whom he had apparently known as a contractor on the county waterfront, had helped him source a crane part that was not supposed to be available outside the state of Georgia. He told it like a story he had been waiting to tell, which meant he had been waiting, which meant he had asked about her before she arrived. Cass watched her sit at the table where his wife had sat and did not say anything and did not look away. In the second week of January, Cass accepted the civilian consulting position with the Naval Hospital's Emergency Preparedness Program. He kept the yard. He kept the coveralls. He drove to the base on Tuesday mornings and worked until noon. The rest of the week he was under trucks and beside cranes and answering parts requests on a clipboard the way it had always been done. Kettle Creek Auto Salvage and Voss Coastal Development signed a partnership agreement for a joint waterfront emergency staging and recovery corridor, a real one, county-sanctioned, EPA-aligned, in the same month. The agreement was 22 pages. The 23rd was a writer Diane had written twice, once in pencil, once in ink. The Sandra Lee Whitmore Fund, 3% of net project revenues in perpetuity, divided between an educational fund for June Whitmore and an annual scholarship for the children of Beaufort County service members. The trust used Sandra's full name, all 3 parts, for the first time in any legal document since the death certificate. Cass read the page. He set the pen down. He did not pick it up for nearly 2 minutes. "She would have done this herself," he said. "She would have done it in half the time and with better handwriting." Then he signed. On a Saturday in February, the Beaufort River was the color of pewter under a high, pale sky. The marsh grass along Ladies Island had turned the dull gold it turns in winter, and the pelicans were working the shallows in slow single file passes that June had learned to count. Diane drove to the yard in jeans and sneakers. She parked beside Cass's truck and walked through the open gate. He was at the back dock where the lot ended and the planks began, over the marsh edge. June was at his hip. He had a length of rope in his hands and he was showing her how to tie a bowline. Rabbit comes out of the hole, goes around the tree, back down the hole. June did it wrong the first time. He showed her again. She did it right the second time. She held up the knot with both hands and her face was the face of a child who has just learned a thing that will last. There you go. He handed her the rope back. She tied it again. Faster, tighter, surer. He took the knot, undid it, gave it back. She tied it a fourth time, each loop cleaner than the last. He looked up then and saw Diane at the edge of the dock planking. He did not say anything. He held out his hand. She walked over. The three of them stood at the end of the dock, low tide, late morning. The river running pewter and slow. June ran ahead to the mud flat looking for shells. Cass looked across the water. He did not look at Diane when he spoke. "You told me this place wasn't worth saving," she said. "I was wrong, and I stayed." He let the silence sit. It was a silence with space in it. After a while he reached out and touched the back of her hand with the back of his. Just that. Just once. The lightest thing. The smallest kind of consent. Down at the mud line, June held up a whole sand dollar the size of her palm and shouted something neither of them could hear over the wind off the river. In the county courthouse in Beaufort that same afternoon, Gordon Tabb filed the final dismissal of the Webb Capital rezoning application. He set it in the inbox without ceremony and went to get a cup of coffee. Dr. Harriet Cohn, in her office at the Naval Hospital, received a photograph by email. No subject line, no sender she recognized. A man and a small girl and a woman at the end of a dock at low tide, the Pewter River behind them and the marsh grass gold along both banks. She printed it. She set it on the corner of her desk beside the photograph she kept of the Nurse Corps graduation ceremony from 2008, where Sandra Whitmore stood in the front row with her cap slightly crooked and her chin exactly level. Dr. Cohn looked at the two photographs together. She did not speak. She bowed her head once, small and deliberate. Then she went back to work. He had stayed in his yard. She had been the one who came back to it, and for the first time since the marsh took Sandra's name and kept it, the fog that settled on Kettle Creek Auto Salvage in the mornings lifted before noon. It had always lifted. He had simply stopped waiting for it to.